Your brother deserves it, Dad said. They gave him the house, the cash, the company. A month later, Mom texted, mortgages due. I replied, ask your hair. It's hard to describe the way I felt when I read that message. Maybe it was a mix of shock and cold resignation. But there was no surprise. Not really. Not after everything that had happened. I had spent 15 years building up that company. It was mine, or at least I had always believed it would be. But Ryan, my younger brother, he had always been the golden child. The one Dad doted on. The one who could do no wrong. It didn't matter how hard I worked, how many hours I put in, or how many late nights I sacrificed. Ryan was the one Dad saw as the future. I still remember the day it happened. That night, I had been so sure, so certain that I had earned my place. I had walked into that dinner meeting with pride, bringing a bottle of Dad's favorite scotch, hoping for some acknowledgement. Maybe a promotion. Maybe a bigger stake in the company. Instead, I sat there, listening as my father made his announcement. He lifted his glass and smiled at Ryan, his voice warm and proud, like I wasn't even there. Ryan, he said, it's the rightful heir. The house, the company, everything, it's all his. And just like that, my world shattered. I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. My hands clenched around the glass in front of me, but I couldn't drink. I couldn't swallow. That night, I packed up what little I had left. My dignity, a few clothes, and my pride. I drove out before sunrise, leaving behind the only life I had ever known. I thought I was leaving for good. But then the message came. Mortgages due. I stared at the screen for longer than I should have, trying to convince myself I didn't care. After all, they had made their choice, hadn't they? I had made mine too. I had left. Still, something twisted inside me when I read it. The desperation in Mom's text was palpable. She hadn't even tried to apologize, not for what they had done, not for the years of my life spent in the shadows of my brother's mistakes. I should have ignored it. I should have walked away, let them sink. But something held me there, something deep inside. The anger I had buried for so long started to surface, hot and raw. I couldn't pretend any longer. So I didn't. I typed the words, sending them without a second thought. Ask your hair. And with that, I walked away from everything I thought I wanted. But I had no idea how much I was about to change. I didn't go back to Boston after that. I couldn't. I packed up my life, left behind the history of what was supposed to be my future, and started over. Chicago felt like a clean slate. I rented a small apartment, the kind with bare walls and a single window that looked out over the skyline. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't have to share it with anyone else, and that alone gave me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The first few weeks were tough. I spent my days cold calling developers, hoping for a project to come through. My nights were filled with rewriting proposals that never seemed to get answered. I remember sitting at my tiny kitchen table. The glow of my laptop the only light in the apartment. The silence pressing in on me. There was no one to answer to hear. No one to prove myself to. And that was both freeing and terrifying. I could feel the weight of it. The pressure of trying to build something from nothing, without any of the support I had once taken for granted. No connections, no family legacy to lean on. Just me. It wasn't the first time I had worked hard, far from it, but this time it felt different. The stakes were higher, the loneliness sharper. I had left behind everything familiar, and now I had to prove that I could succeed without them. As the weeks passed, I started to make a name for myself. Small projects came through, and with each one, I gained a little more confidence. There was something satisfying about working for myself, about seeing the fruits of my labor without anyone else's expectations hanging over me. And yet, the nagging thought never fully left. My father's words, Ryan's entitled smirk, the company I had sacrificed so much for. It was all still there, lingering at the back of my mind, just out of reach. I didn't want to think about it. I couldn't afford to. But then the emails started. The first one came from Barbara, the neighbor who had been close with my parents for years. She mentioned that the landscaping around my childhood home had gone wild. The lawn uncut, the shutters peeling. It was a small thing, a passing comment. But it was enough to make me pause. She mentioned that my parents hadn't renewed their country club membership, something they had always prided themselves on. A quiet worry seeped through every sentence. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing it. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I didn't respond. I told myself that it wasn't my problem anymore, that I had moved on. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next email came from Martin, the head estimator who had worked alongside my father for years. He told me that Ryan had fired Dolores and Jim, two key people who had been with the company for decades. Martin's message ended with a simple note. I thought you should know before things get worse. I deleted it without responding, but my stomach twisted as I hit the key. More emails followed. A project manager, a subcontractor, a developer, each one more urgent than the last. The company was in trouble. Ryan had driven it into the ground. The emails all seemed to have the same underlying message: the business was crumbling, and my father and brother were too blind to see it. I didn't want to care. I told myself that they had made their choices, that I wasn't the one who had walked away from everything. But the more I read, the harder it became to ignore the pull, the responsibility I couldn't shake. I didn't reply to any of the messages. Not yet. But then, one evening, after a long day of meetings, I sat back in my chair, staring out at the city lights flickering below. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was a blurry screenshot of a conversation between two former employees, discussing unpaid wages and the possibility that the company might fold within weeks. Underneath the screenshot, the sender had written, "You should call your parents." I sat there for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to go back to that place, that family dynamic. But as the weight of it all settled in, I couldn't ignore the truth. The company I had once loved, the company I had given everything to, was falling apart. And no one else seemed to care. It was then that I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. I had been waiting for this. Waiting for the moment when they would need me, when I could finally make them see. And so, I made a decision. I couldn't sit idly by. I had built something here, in Chicago, on my own terms. But the people who had once discarded me, my family, were now in a place where they had no one else to turn to. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I had to do. The messages kept coming. Each one more urgent than the last, each one more troubling. I had avoided responding, telling myself that it wasn't my problem anymore. I had moved on, rebuilt my life in Chicago. But now, every email, every update, was pulling me back. Pulling me into a story I thought I had left behind. I didn't want to care. I didn't want to get involved again. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep running. The final message came late one evening. This one was from Martin, the head estimator who had worked with my father for years. He had always been one of the steady ones, the kind of guy who knew the numbers, knew the project timelines inside and out. His email wasn't even a message, just a simple text with a subject line that made my stomach twist. It's bad. Cheryl, I left the company today. Ryan fired Dolores and Jim. Said they were too expensive. His note ended with, I thought you should know before things get worse. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Martin's message wasn't just about firing people. It was about the collapse of everything my father had worked for. Everything I had worked for. The company I had spent my youth pouring my soul into. The one I had tried to save when no one else believed in it. Now, it was slipping away, piece by piece. And there was nothing I could do from here. I closed the email without replying, the weight of it pressing down on me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't ignore them. A week passed, and I stayed silent. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. The family business, the one that had been built up over generations, was crumbling, and I wasn't there to fix it. Then, one morning, as I was finishing a proposal for a new client, my phone buzzed. Another text. This one was from an unknown number. I had no reason to expect it to be anything other than the usual spam. But when I glanced at the preview, I froze. It was a blurry screenshot of a conversation between two former employees. They were talking about unpaid wages and how the company was in financial trouble. The conversation ended with one person saying, "It's bad. Call your parents." I didn't have to read the rest. I already knew what this meant. The weight of the situation, the desperation in that simple sentence, it hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring at the screen, letting the truth sink in. The company was about to collapse, and they needed me. But why? Why now? After everything. Why were they reaching out to me, the daughter they had dismissed for so long? Was it because they had finally realized they couldn't do it without me? Or was it just that I was their last option? I didn't know. But what I did know was this: the company, the one I had spent my life building, was on the edge of collapse. And I couldn't just let it fall. I had left. I had made the decision to walk away, to cut ties with a family who had never seen me for who I was, who had always overlooked my worth. But now, standing at the edge of this new, uncertain world I had built for myself, I couldn't ignore the pull to return, to fix what had been broken. I had made my decision years ago when I walked out the door. But the situation was different now. They were asking for help. They needed me. And the worst part was I wasn't sure if I could say no. I set my phone down and took a deep breath, the cold air from the open window doing little to clear my head. I tried to push away the guilt, the responsibility, but it was there, gnawing at me. I had spent years trying to forget them, trying to forget the anger and disappointment I felt from all those years of hard work that went unrecognized. But now, the past was staring me in the face, and I had to make a choice. I knew what I had to do, but it wasn't going to be easy. I drove back to Boston before sunrise. The city I had spent my entire life avoiding now seemed to pull me back, like a tide I couldn't escape. The familiar roads, the smell of the air, the houses I had known since I was a child. It was all too much. I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right choice. But there was no turning back now. The drive felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was the weight of the past pressing in on me, or maybe it was the uncertainty of what I was walking into. When I arrived, everything was eerily familiar, but different at the same time. The house that had once been a symbol of success and tradition now looked tired and worn. The lawn was patchy, the shutters were chipped, and the driveway was cracked. It didn't look like the home I remembered, the one my father had cared for so meticulously. I parked in front of the house and sat there for a moment, taking it all in. This wasn't just a house, it was the cornerstone of everything I had worked for. The family business, the legacy, all of it had been built here. But now, it was crumbling, just like the house. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my skin. The walk to the front door felt heavy, like I was walking through some strange version of my past. When I knocked, no one answered. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The living room looked nothing like I remembered. It was filled with stacks of paperwork, bills, loan statements, and red, stamped warnings. It felt like walking into an evidence board, one that told the story of failure and neglect. My mother sat on the couch, her hands wringing together nervously, her eyes flickering between the piles of papers and the empty space in front of her. My father paced behind her, his once commanding presence diminished. And Ryan, of course, was sitting in his usual spot, looking far too comfortable, like he didn't have a care in the world. I could feel the tension in the air. The silence between us spoke louder than words. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to face them, but I knew I had no choice. "Cheryl," my mother said, her voice shaky. She stood up, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and uncertainty. "We're so glad you came." I didn't respond right away. My eyes moved over the piles of papers, the weight of the situation hitting me hard. This wasn't just about a mortgage. This wasn't just about the company. It was about everything that had been taken from me. Everything I had been denied. I walked to the table and set down my bag. "What happened?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. My father stopped pacing and finally turned to face me. He looked smaller somehow. His shoulders hunched in defeat. "Things escalated faster than we expected," he said. There was a wariness in his voice that I had never heard before. I looked at Ryan, who was still sitting in the armchair, his tan from some recent trip still fresh on his face. He didn't even seem bothered. He barely even looked up. "We need your help," my father added, his voice quieter this time. I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "You need my help," I repeated, my voice sharp. "After everything. After you handed everything to Ryan." There it was. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment I had hoped would never come. Ryan stood up suddenly, his face reddening. "Can we not do this right now?" He snapped. "Dad said you're here to help, not lecture." I turned to face him, my patience running thin. "A lecture?" I scoffed. "You think this is a lecture?" "I've been lectured for years, Ryan. I've been told I wasn't good enough, told my work didn't matter, told I didn't deserve anything. And now, suddenly, you want my help." Ryan crossed his arms. "You don't know what it's like to run a company," he muttered. I took a deep breath, my anger simmering just below the surface. "Actually, I do," I said quietly. "I ran it for 15 years. The room went silent. I could feel my father's eyes on me, the shame in them almost palpable. Ryan stood frozen, caught between guilt and disbelief. "So," I continued, my voice steady, "why exactly did you call me?" My father hesitated, then sighed. "We thought if you could return in a leadership capacity, maybe as COO or CFO, we could save the company." I looked at him, disbelief giving way to a cold resolve. "I'm not coming back as an employee," I said, my words cutting through the air. "I'm not putting my name, my reputation on the line for a company that's already been ruined." Ryan's face turned red. "This is insane," he shouted. "Dad, you can't let her do this." I stood taller, my gaze fixed firmly on him. "You don't get to make that decision anymore," I said quietly. "This is my company now, whether you like it or not." The tension in the room was suffocating. I could see the fear in my father's eyes, the shame still hanging over him. And I could see the resentment in Ryan's. He had never expected me to come back like this. But now, here I was. I looked at my father, who was still standing behind my mother. "I want controlling interest," I said, my voice firm. "Majority ownership, full decision-making authority. I will rebuild this company, but only if I'm in charge. No interference. No more favoritism. No more mistakes." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew I meant every word. And that was when the real negotiation began. The room fell silent after my demand for controlling interest hung in the air. My father looked at me with something like disbelief, while Ryan's eyes narrowed with resentment. For a moment, I thought they might protest, but neither of them said anything. My father sighed, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the world had just been placed back on him. "Cheryl, majority ownership is a big ask," he said, his voice quieter now. "This company, it's been in the family for generations. It's not just business, it's tradition. We can't just hand it over." I took a step closer to the table, my fingers resting lightly on the papers scattered across it. "You already did. Years ago, when you decided Ryan was the heir, you handed him everything and you watched me walk out. But now, the company is on the verge of collapsing, and you want my help. I'm not doing this for you, Dad. I'm doing this for the people who still believe in what this company was supposed to be. For the employees you're about to lose." Ryan shifted in his chair, clearly agitated. "So what, now you're gonna come in and fix everything? After you abandoned us, you think you can just waltz in and take over?" I turned to face him, my voice calm but firm. "Yes, I do. Because I'm the only one here who actually knows how to save it. You've been riding on the coattails of Dad's success, pretending to be a leader while letting everything fall apart. You don't get to call the shots anymore." Ryan shot me a glare, but I didn't flinch. My father glanced between us, his eyes clouded with regret. "What do you want from us, Cheryl?" His voice cracked, the desperation finally breaking through. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I want everything on the table. I want full transparency. Payments, bills, contracts, everything. If I'm going to step in and take charge, I need to see the truth. All of it. No more secrets." My father opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "And Ryan, he steps down from any financial or operational authority. He can stay on as a figurehead, if you really want that, but no more decisions. I'll choose the leadership team. I will rebuild this company, but I'm doing it my way." Ryan stood up suddenly, his face flushed with anger. "This is my company, Cheryl. I've worked for this." "No, you haven't," I replied, my voice steady. "You've coasted through life on a title you didn't earn. You didn't work for this. You never have." He was seething now, his hands clenched into fists. "You always think you're better than me, don't you? Always acting like you're the only one who worked hard, like you're the only one who deserves anything." I stepped forward, the space between us closing. "I don't need you to like me, Ryan. I need you to understand that this isn't about you. It's about the company. About saving something that still has a chance. But I'm not doing it if it means letting you keep calling the shots." The silence stretched on. My father shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Ryan before finally speaking. "You really think you can save this? After everything?" I nodded, my gaze unwavering. "Yes, I do. I've done it before. And I'll do it again." My father looked at me for a long time, the weight of my words settling in. He exhaled slowly, then reached for the pen. "If we say no," he began, but I interrupted him before he could finish. "If you say no, I walk away," I said, my voice firm. Again. "And this time, I'm not coming back." My father's hand trembled slightly as he signed the papers. The decision had been made, but I knew this was just the beginning. The real work was about to start. Ryan stood there, seething, his eyes burning with anger and fear. "This isn't fair," he muttered under his breath, but I didn't respond. I turned to my father. "You said you needed my help. Well, this is what it looks like. I'll save this company, but it's on my terms." He didn't argue. Instead, he signed, the finality of it echoing in the room. When Ryan reluctantly signed his name, his face was twisted with frustration, but there was nothing he could do. The power had shifted, and he knew it. The moment the papers were signed, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. The company was mine now, and I was the only one who could fix it. But I also knew that what had started with a single, bitter choice was far from over. The days that followed my decision were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and endless piles of paperwork. It felt like the world was moving at a speed I could barely keep up with. But in the midst of the chaos, I felt something shift inside me, a strange, almost exhilarating sense of control. The company had been on the brink of collapse for too long. The trust had been shattered, not just between the family, but with the clients, the employees, and the vendors. Rebuilding was going to take everything I had. It wasn't just about fixing the numbers or reorganizing the staff. It was about restoring the integrity that had been lost over the years. I started with the team. The first thing I did was sit down with Daniel West, the CFO. He had been with the company for over 15 years, and unlike Ryan, he actually understood the business. I told him what I needed: transparency, accountability, and a clear plan to stop the bleeding. Ryan's been running this into the ground, I said, looking over the financials with him. We need to cut the fat and fast. Start with the unnecessary expenses and work our way down from there. Daniel nodded. I've been waiting for someone to say that for years. Ryan's spending habits. He shook his head. They've been a problem for a long time. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Ryan had been comfortable in his position for far too long, and now he was forced to work under my leadership, which he hated. But I wasn't going to coddle him. I wasn't here to babysit. I brought in the key players, the people who still had faith in the company. Dolores, who had been with us for nearly 20 years, came back first. The relief in her eyes when I told her she was reinstated was enough to fuel me through the toughest days. We're going to make this work, I promised her. Even though I had no idea how I was going to fix everything. I need you to help me get this company back on track. She smiled, nodding, and I could see the weight lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't just returning to a job, she was returning to a purpose, and that meant everything to me. I wasn't just rebuilding the business, I was rebuilding relationships, trust that had been broken, respect that had been lost. Every meeting, every decision I made, had to be calculated. One wrong move and everything could come crashing down again. Ryan wasn't happy, of course. Every time I gave him a task, he sulked, doing the bare minimum. He still wanted to be the hero, the one who saved the company, even though he had no idea how to lead. It was infuriating, but I didn't have time to argue with him. There was too much at stake. The first month passed in a blur of spreadsheets, contractor negotiations, and late nights in the office. I felt like I was drowning in it, but I couldn't stop. I had made this decision, and there was no turning back. But then, things started to change. Slowly at first. Clients who had pulled away began reaching out again, cautiously optimistic about the changes they were seeing. The vendors who had once given us shaky credit started extending better terms. The team was starting to believe in me, and I could feel the momentum shifting. I was running on little more than adrenaline. My mind raced constantly, calculating, analyzing, and planning for what came next. And then, one evening, as I sat at my desk, I got a message from Daniel. "We're breaking even," he wrote. I sat back in my chair, staring at the message. Breaking even wasn't a victory, but it was progress. We had stopped the bleeding. It was the first sign that we weren't just surviving. We were starting to rebuild. I let out a long breath, something I hadn't realized I was holding. I allowed myself a moment of relief, but only for a moment. There was still so much to do. The next few months were a whirlwind. I worked harder than I ever had in my life, pushing myself and my team to their limits. The company slowly began to stabilize, but it was far from easy. There were days when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was in over my head. But there were also days when I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. When I watched the people who had left come back, when I saw the trust start to rebuild. That's when I knew we were on the right path. And as much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't have done it without Daniel. Without Dolores. Without the people who still believed in what we were doing. But Ryan. He was still there, lurking in the background, trying to undermine everything I did. He had a way of making me second, guess myself, like I wasn't qualified to run things. And maybe, in some ways I wasn't. But I wasn't about to let him win. One afternoon, I had a conversation with Daniel that made everything feel real. "We're gonna make it," he said, sitting across from me in the small, quiet office that had become my refuge. "You've done the impossible. The worst is behind us." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange sense of pride. It wasn't about the company anymore. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about making something out of the mess I had been handed. About doing it right this time. I knew there was still a long way to go. But for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. The tension in the office had been building for months. Ryan still resented me, still couldn't let go of the fact that I was in charge now, even if he wasn't willing to admit it. Every time I walked into a meeting, I could feel his eyes on me, his silent challenge, like he was waiting for me to slip up. But I didn't. By now, the company was starting to stabilize, and some clients were beginning to return. The bleeding had stopped, but the trust that had been shattered between my family and the employees wasn't so easily mended. Ryan, however, was another matter entirely. He made it clear every single day that he wasn't happy with how things were going. He resented the new structure, the limits I had imposed on him, and every time I caught him attempting to bypass my authority, I had to remind him that the company was mine now. "You can't just run everything, Cheryl," he said one afternoon when I pointed out yet another failure on his part. "You have no idea what it's like to manage all this." "I do." I shot back, not raising my voice, but making sure he heard every word. "I've been managing it for years. It's you who never had to work for it." Ryan's face turned red. He always hated it when I reminded him of the years I had put in before he even knew what a contractor's bid looked like. But this time, I wasn't about to let him get away with his usual game of acting, like everything I did was somehow unearned. "Maybe it's time you started learning what real leadership looks like." I continued, my voice steady. "You don't get to keep making decisions that undermine this company, just because Dad gave you a title you didn't deserve." He didn't respond, but his frustration was obvious. I wasn't going to give him an inch, not this time. The next few weeks were a constant battle. Ryan's passive, aggressive comments, his undermining, it all continued. But I kept pushing forward, not letting his hostility shake my resolve. I was building something new here, something better, and I wasn't going to let him destroy it. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from Daniel. "Cheryl," he said, his voice more serious than I had ever heard it. "You need to see this. It's getting worse." I felt my stomach drop. "What is it?" "Ryan's been making deals behind your back. He's signing contracts with vendors and clients without consulting anyone, without following the new procedures you put in place." I couldn't believe it. After everything, after all the changes I had made to save this company, Ryan was still trying to act like he was in charge. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to center myself. I couldn't let my emotions get in the way. I had to deal with this once and for all. "Thanks, Daniel. I'll take care of it." I hung up the phone, the anger bubbling up inside me. Ryan had crossed a line this time. I had been patient, I had been fair, but he was testing my limits. I called him into my office. "What's this I'm hearing about deals you're making without consulting anyone?" I asked, my tone icy. Ryan looked taken aback for a moment, then recovered his composure. "I'm just trying to help, Cheryl. You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "The pressure?" I repeated, my voice low. "You think I don't understand pressure? You think I haven't been carrying this company on my back for years, while you played CEO. His eyes flashed with anger, but I didn't back down. No more. You are not in charge anymore, I said, every word deliberate. From now on, you will follow the procedures. You will work with the team. No more decisions without me. Ryan stood there for a long moment, silent. The defiance in his eyes was palpable, but he didn't speak. I'm giving you one chance to get it right, Ryan. I continued. I'm not going to let you destroy everything we've worked for just because you're still stuck in the past. Finally, he nodded stiffly, but I could see the resentment in his face. He hadn't given up. He hadn't learned anything. I left the office feeling more certain than ever. This wasn't just about fixing the company. It was about fixing everything, including the broken relationships, the years of resentment, and the misguided sense of entitlement that had nearly torn us apart. But as I walked down the hallway, I couldn't help but wonder if I was asking for too much. Was it even possible for us to heal after everything? Could we ever get past the years of favoritism, of mistakes that had been buried for far too long? I didn't have the answers. But I did know one thing: I wasn't going to let Ryan, or anyone else, tear down what I had fought so hard to build. Not this time. I left Boston with a sense of relief, but also a quiet weight in my chest. The house had been sold. The family that had once been so proud of their legacy had let go of it all. My parents had moved into a smaller place closer to town, and when I visited them a few weeks later, it was a different feeling. There was no grandiose air about their new home, no ostentation. The house was humble. My father, the man who had once ruled this empire with an iron fist, now seemed smaller somehow, quieter. But it wasn't just the house that had changed. The tension in their voices when they spoke to me had faded. My mother, in her soft-spoken way, had finally acknowledged the effort I had put in, though she never said it outright. My father's gaze, once filled with pride and disappointment, had softened. I had done it. I had saved what was left of the company, and in the process, I had learned something about myself. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their permission. What mattered was that I had found my own place in this world. When I returned to Chicago, it felt different. Not like returning to an old life, but to a new beginning. My office there, once a place where I buried myself in work to escape my past, now felt like the starting point for something I had chosen. It wasn't just the company I had rebuilt, it was me. I had reclaimed my own narrative. The first profitable quarter came in, and with it, the first signs that everything I had sacrificed for was finally paying off. I had learned how to lead, how to trust myself, how to stand my ground. And the company, despite everything, was starting to grow again. But it wasn't the money or the numbers that made it worth it. It was the people, the team I had worked so hard to bring back. The ones who believed in me when the rest of the world doubted. It was the moment when Daniel, after the second successful quarter, said to me, "You did it." Those 3 words meant more than any paycheck ever could. When my mother sent me the message thanking me for saving their legacy, I didn't know how to respond. It wasn't about legacy anymore. It wasn't about what I had rebuilt or restored. It was about doing what was right, even when no one else could see it. I took a deep breath, staring out at the city skyline from my office window. The hustle, the noise, the chaos, it all felt distant now. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I wasn't hiding behind my work or my family's expectations. I was finally living for myself. I did this for me. I whispered to no one in particular. I wasn't looking for validation, not from my parents, not from Ryan. I was doing this for the people who still believed in me. For the employees who needed the company to survive, and for the version of myself that had been buried under years of resentment and neglect. For the first time in my life, I was free. And that, I realized, was the true victory. The company was stable now. But more importantly, I had found my place in the world, not as the daughter of a family business, but as a leader in my own right. And nothing would ever change that.